psychological meaning of Frankenstein becomes transparent, meaning clear as a window, into the soul of the author. Remember, she wrote Frankenstein under the influence of an opium dream. I don't know if that's actually relevant. It is kind of the mystique. She wrote it under an opium dream. She had a dream, and it all came like a flash. But I'm kind of arguing against that, because what I'm saying is it never, I mean, it might have came as a flash. Yeah, it came as a flash, but she was just kind of looking into the mirror and coming up with an idea, because it was a reflection of her life. Okay. I'm not sure what they were taking as far as drugs. It was some sort of opium, morphine kind of thing. I don't know. It caused hallucinations, because while Lord Byron was reading from a book of scary-sounding poems, Shelley looked at Mary. Percy Shelley, her husband. And I'm not making this up. This sounds like I'm like a kooky story, but this is reality. Okay, they're all on opium, I guess. And Byron's reading this some kind of spooky poetry, and Mary's breasts, instead of nipples, were eyeballs, and the eyeballs were staring at Percy Shelley, and he ran out of the room in horror, screaming. And he didn't write a horror story. They all had to write a horror story, but Percy Shelley was too afraid. My first thought is, wow, what libertines! I mean, that's kind of kooky. And his wife was nude. Or topless in front of friends. That's nude, if you're topless. And the her nipples or eyeballs, I've drawn that. I think everyone imagines that somehow. That's like I don't know, has every 14-year-old boy that has ever drawn that? I don't know. It might be something that only a certain type of person draws, but there are these images that all artists will draw, like kind of, there's this fountain, of the imagination, and we all can draw from it, and that's one of the things that just kind of either comes from the fountain, or else it's just like a logical idea that everyone goes to, because I could draw an eyeball, and it does look kind of like a nipple. Sometimes it's a problem, almost like sometimes you have to make it not look like one, and sometimes you have to make a nipple not look like an eyeball. And so I could see why he thought it was an eyeball. So, but running away from it. It looks like an eyeball. Of course it looks like an eyeball. It's a circle inside of a circle, on a big globular structure. That's what an eyeball is, and it looks like an eyeball. Yeah, scary, very scary. So yeah, he didn't write a horror story. I haven't read much of his poetry, actually, but I've read something. I can't say the title. It's something. It's a cool looking word, and the poem is really cool. I think I'm going to do a comic of it. It sticks in my mind. Okay, and anyway, this shared fountain of the imagination. These are my cohorts, I would say. Any hallucinating is like drawing. A hallucinator, anybody that hallucinates in some way is drawing. That's what drawing is. If you're not hallucinating while you're drawing, you're not drawing. It's like, that's why AI isn't good, because it's not a human hallucinating. It's an AI. It's the computer regurgitating the sort of the carcass of a human that hallucinated. So every hallucination, hallucination is just your will, it's produced out of your free will. Okay, Shelley didn't draw it. The mental creation is a peek into the soul of another human being. That's what art is. Okay, so you're seeing a human's fantasy, or you're seeing a human's thoughts. You're seeing a human's thoughts. That's my art is human thought. I don't mean this is human thought. This is me talking. My art, my musical comics, it kind of, it duplicates human thought, but that's what it is. It doesn't exist without human thought. It's like human thought. Okay, Frankenstein's a peek into Mary Shelley's thoughts, into her soul and psyche. She is the monster. Mary Shelley is the monster. This is the opium autobiography of Mary Shelley. She's the monster, and her father is the scientist creator, Victor Frankenstein. Victor von Frankenstein. Her father was a famous libertine socialist thinker. Okay, so her father was basically one of the fathers of leftist thought right now. Like, not right now, of like the whole scheme since what the so-called Enlightenment. Okay. He's one of the people that created our modern political ideology at the very foundation. He pushed revolutionary atheism, individualism, libertine, sexual values. What happens when someone like this has a daughter? I mean, we know it now, but we don't know it now because, people just kind of go with the flow. But her father, William Godwin, he wasn't like a Karl Marx, but he was one of the people that were writing it down. And her mother was too. Her mother had books on, basically feminism. It's strange how the whole thing is a straight line, but surely living in those days, these were the olden days, and she was in this very, very, very small bubble. Okay, it's this bubble that's growing bigger and bigger, but this is such a small bubble she lived in. Okay, what happens when someone like this has a daughter? Mary Shelley is what happens when someone like this has a daughter, a revolutionary, atheistic, individualistic young woman with libertine values and I guess a libertine imagination. I don't know. Libertine imagination. Is my imagination a libertine imagination? I kind of go everywhere. But the thing is, I have a moral sensibility. Okay, so it's like Dante. I'm like Dante. Well, actually, Dante, he has this scene where it's like he's like with the greatest poems, and they're like, "Come on over, Dante," and he wasn't really in their category yet, So I could say I'm like Dante. Yeah, I'm like Dante. Okay. Why am I saying I'm like Dante? That's sorry. I'm like Dante. No, but that's the thing. Why am I talking about Dante? Because you could imagine anything. Okay, you could have kind of not libertine values, but a lot of people won't go places in their imagination because, if you have libertine values and you go places in imagination, you'll come up mad. You'll come up insane. Okay, that's how people become insane. If it's not a demon, that's how people become insane. Okay, and you don't notice yourself becoming insane, but it's maybe 100 years from now we'll be able to say, okay, those people were plainly insane. And those people, and those people, and those people. And then that's the whole thing, is a lot of the people that we just think are, well, that's pretty regular. I don't know, people in the future will say those people are plainly insane. And her father didn't believe in free will. It's all the same stuff. Everything is the same stuff. The blank slate, it was all there. Everything was there. And the blank slate, he created Mary. The blank slate is the Frankenstein monster. The Frankenstein monster is the blank slate. They, how did Victor Frankenstein treat the blank slate that he made? He treated her with he treated the monster with disgust. Like he never treated the monster with love at any point of the way. It was disgust. And I'm sure it wasn't that. I'm sure it was, can I say this word? Grooming, ing Mary, because, like, I don't mean that he was a pervert. I mean, like, that he brought her into an ideology that nobody else had at that. Well, not nobody else had, but definitely the image of the angry villagers with their pitchforks. That's like you don't walk out the door and find libertines everywhere in the 1800s. Imagine living in the 1800s with 2020s values. Of course, Mary was scandalous. You give someone values like that, and of course they're going to be scandalous. But she was scandalous in a time that had 1800s values, and most people. She was blamed for a woman. Okay, I think Mary Shelley had some sort of affair with some guy, and the wife unalived herself. And it was just she was a scandalous young woman because she had an intellectually scandalous father. And that's the whole thing, intellectually scandalous. But was he like as scandalous as Mary? What happens when you're filled with the intellectual idea? It's just like Richard Dawkins. Now he's a Christian. He's not a Christian. I don't mean he's Christian. He's a cultural Christian. He calls him after trouncing on Christianity for years and years and years. Now he sees, old buildings. Christians invented scientific method. War crimes. The Catholic Church was the one that instituted war crimes as a concept. It wasn't even a concept before they were doing that. That's amazing. Like all the great things, innocent till proven guilty. It's like, yeah, of course he's a cultural Christian now, but that's like William Godwin. Okay, like it's like when he sees what his philosophy does, all of a sudden now he's a cultural Christian. So he's a cultural Christian in his real life, but on paper, no, he's a libertine. He's like that too, because reading about him, it's his wife, Mary Wollstonecraft. She had a whole history of trying to unalive herself. Okay, she was always trying to unalive her. She was like a proto Sylvia Plath, and she was the kind of guy that finds that, like, hey, that's the kind of girl I'm gonna set myself up with. That's who William Godwin was. You could picture him, like he's like the I guess the bleeding heart. This poor woman, like, let's take her and pick her up, and of course she was really smart and everything. Of course she was, because she wrote a bunch of books and stuff like that. And anyway, the father was appalled because, contrary to everything he wrote, he was appalled. I look at Google for what the story means, and it's strange. It's funny because one was saying it's a queer story. And it's like people are projecting so much onto this tale, but I'm talking about what it means. No, I'm not talking about what it means. You could project whatever you want, what it means. Like, sure, okay, do that. But I'm talking about Mary's real life, and just how, like, you look at the story and say, oh, this is like, okay, this kind of, like, there's an analog that happened to Mary here. Oh, hey, yeah. And it's kind of like she's writing just her own life is like, I am a monster, because she was ostracized. This is 1800s, and she was the wicked daughter of William Godwin, the proof of his ideas being wicked. And people look at this story, and I wonder, like, if it's because a lot of the people that are writing critiques are childless. Okay, so they look at it and they say, "Oh, this is obviously," because it's so obviously just like not just like it's so obviously a tale about a bad parent. Like the bad parent made a monster, and anybody that has had kids like knows that you make a monster because everything that's really bad about you gets reflected onto the kids. It's like you or your wife. And so every once in a while, there's something that like comes from the grandparents. Yeah. And then amid all the influences around, there's the actual person that is completely unique under it, expressing itself that you'll be surprised. Your kid will reflect you, but also this other person that comes from nowhere because it's a unique soul, as every soul is. It all gets reflected back on you with your kid. So, I mean, Frankenstein, that's why it's a masterpiece, because it not only says that so clearly, but it also says it in this oblique way that says so much else too. Anyway, Victor created a monster just like William Godwin's Enlightenment morals created a scandalous daughter. William Godwin did what Victor Frankenstein did. He cast her away. He cast his monster away. When Mary wrote Frankenstein, she was cut off from her father's love for becoming the monster he raised her to be, from his ideas, excommunicated from him, cast into a world that thought she was a scandalous monster. Like this is the story of Frankenstein. This is the story of Mary Shelley. Her father was a hypocrite whose actions exposed his Enlightenment philosophy for what it was, a self-destructive recipe. I do see William Godwin as the real monster of Mary's real life story, just like I see Victor von Frankenstein, Dr. Victor von Frankenstein, as the real villain of that story, of Mary's story. What kind of father teaches his daughter not to have morals and then casts her away because of her lack of morals? Instead, Mary could only get closer to other libertines now, like Lord Byron. he was like a vampire. Lord Byron. Lord Byron. He wrote an autobiography, and I wonder, like, yeah, it was supposed to be. He was thrown away by his publisher. His publisher thought it was so obscene, he threw it away. Not just obscene, but what would it have been? Anyway, she went with her husband, Percy Shelley, of course, and that would mean William Godwin would have to confront the reality that his very own ideology turned his own daughter into someone that disgusted him. Your own ideology produces what disgusts you. She was testimony that he actually hated his own ideology's results. He was just in love with logic. That's it. These people, they're in love with logic. They're in love with, there's a rationale they have to get what they want, but they can't really connect with the fact that the rationale is just this logical path that they're in love with, that really is just rationalizing. There can be so many logical paths, but which one to pick? That's the problem with logic. You might know the answer. You might know it deep in some sort of intuitive way. You know what it is. You know what it is. Everybody knows what it is, but logic will sometimes tell you that your eyes are lying, that your nose is lying. It doesn't really stink. It's actually beautiful. Look at this 20-page manifesto that explains how beautiful this smell is. Reality itself is ineffable. That's the problem. It's inevitable, but we could somehow like change it with logic. We can't change reality itself, but we could change some people's perception of it for a short while. And we only see the results of this wrong logical pathway when it's too late, many years later sometimes, if we're only bound to logic. Many years later, we just become a footnote where people kind of snicker at. Who's the enemy of the monster? The same as the enemy of Mary Shelley. The peasants, the unenlightened, the masses that are unacquainted with their elite atheistic libertine socialism. The ivory tower where all the bad ideas we're shackled with today were invented. Poor, poor Mary was the first monstrosity. So it's kind of interesting in a 2020 way that Frankenstein is essentially a transhumanist story. Frankenstein monster is created by technology and the logic of science. When people say, I follow the science, this is unfortunately the hidden meaning of that phrase. You're following a bunch of logical pathways, okay? But you're not necessarily following a moral pathway. You're not following a big picture view of things. You're just following a method. It's not really following anything. It's just a method. And that's all Dr. Frankenstein was. He was a method. He was in love with this method, and he didn't even think about the results. When he saw the results, he was so disgusted with what he saw. But he was still in love with his method and tore him apart inside. And that's probably what happened to her father. He must have been torn up inside, thinking, my gosh, we produce monsters in our sleep. Mary Shelley was a monster created by social science. The angry villagers weren't chasing her with torches, but people knew where she was before she got there. Her reputation preceded her, so she escaped with Percy Shelley to somewhere where they didn't speak English anymore. Oh, she was with Lord Byron and some other guy in some huge mansion somewhere in Switzerland. They all had a scary story challenge by Lord Byron. And everybody had to write a scary story. Mary Shelley wrote Frankenstein. Byron wrote a vampire story. The guy whose name starts with P, he wrote a vampire story too. Percy Shelley, he ran away in terror from his wife's boobies. He didn't have the guts to write a scary story. I think all male writers should be able to write a scary story. If you can't do that, you're afraid of something in your own mind. That is the thing about writing. That's why AI can't replace writers and authors. Because what's interesting is the human mind, but not just the human mind, the soul, let's see what happens. Let's see what happens to people when they kind of their minds just become regurgitations from combinations brought about by machines. I'm not saying people watching a movie will be able to tell, but a book, art, a story has the imprint of a writer's soul. And because you can't tell, it's because you've been kind of all media is kind of soulless. It's so full of like technology and everything. And people it's like AI. People say that at first they could tell an AI song, and then after they listen to a few too many, they can't tell the difference between real music and AI music. And the soul is a really funny thing in art. I've talked about this to atheists that have to resort to almost religious sounding statements. Statements that they know aren't religious, but they're like dancing close to it. And you could point out to them, that sounds religious. And then they have to figure out some logical pathway to rationalize it. It's not religious, and it's just psychological. And just like this whole story, it's psychological. That's kind of what I'm doing too. But I mean, that's just one facet of thought, and they're hooking themselves to one facet of thought, and that's the problem with the logical pathway is they tend to they glom onto it because they could ignore everything else. Art is the closest proof we have of the soul, but you have to see beyond those pathways. This is why I think CIA turned art into abstract. This is a conspiracy that we know about. We, through the Freedom of Information Act, we know that they socially engineered art to be abstract. And why did they do that? Okay, because the soul is transmitted through art, and they wanted the soul not to be transmitting too much to people, and let's make it abstract, and the soul is transmitted through the abstract art. I'm not saying art like that's abstract is terrible. I'm saying the public thinks it's terrible, so it made art nothing. Okay, and then people went, I like photos better, so art has to copy a photo. So art had to basically copy technology, or else be so irrelevant that it's basically just a new way to print money for rich people. That's what it is. It's you can't reproduce one of a kind piece of cash that everybody just kind of, okay, we all just agree to, and we don't all agree, just some sort of elite crowd. Just if the CIA was getting the critics to say that this stuff that's not that great is great, then the whole economic system of art is off right from the very foundation, because it's corrupt. And so we have to look at it and say, well, most of that is just kind of garbage, but we want to say it's worth millions and millions and millions of bucks. But it's only so because corrupt, like we know they're corrupt because the Freedom of Information shows us that, yes, indeed, they were not only corrupt, but the magazines were even owned by the CIA. And it's so funny. I mean, speaking of funny, Frankenstein in some way is a satire, okay, of the godless world. I say satire because, satire doesn't always have to be funny. It can just be outrageous. And Frankenstein is a manifestation of the godless world. This is what the godless world creates. Mary experienced her family's atheism. That would have contrasted with the peasants, with not the peasants, but so many people are peasants. I think people nowadays think peasants, and they think like I don't know if they think is fully like of those days. I've been reading from those days, and I look at art from those days, and so those people are humanized to me, and it's much more than I don't want to insult people, because they probably they might be on the same page as me. So yeah. Anyway, they're regular folks and with faith and true faith in those days, right? You could say, oh, back then everybody was like, no, they weren't. The typical person wasn't, right? This hasn't, pushed its way into the country yet. This is just, these are elites at this point, okay? These elites they don't know anything, but they think they know something, because what they know is so radically different than what everybody else thinks, what the regular people think. So for so long, it seemed wild. It seemed, oh, that must be a good idea, because it's so logical and so different, and so it kind of lit a fire in a lot of artists, I think, in a lot of writers' minds. This contrast between ideologies has been happening a long time. I mean, if you go right back to the Adam and Eve and the Garden of Eden, it's the same conflict. But I don't want to talk about that so much right now. We now make the people. Look at that. We make it all. And this is Frankenstein. This is what we make. Look at the abominations we create. Look at bottled milk. They convince mothers and fathers the science can make a healthier milk than the mother produces naturally. Was that when we dialed up the Frankensteining of modern man? I think so. That was when it really dialed up. I remember my father was so upset that my wife was breastfeeding. And we know now, we believe we know, and we intuitively know that breastfeeding is better. But for a little while, they convinced everybody that breastfeeding actually isn't as good. And science has a formula that is so much better. And my dad was a boomer. He grew up seeing progress as exciting. So, he really argued with us and wanted us to use formula as a supplement at least. But no, we're not gonna. So Frankenstein is saying we're now the gods. We're the ones that create. It's a compulsion for him. It's not even joyful. He's creating, but he's just in love with a logical pathway. He's not a loving creator. He's not an artist. He's a scientist. This is what we produce when we pick the apple. This isn't like the artist is touched by God, but the scientist is basically picking the apple and picking it and dissecting it. If I could relate it to the Garden of Eden, it's the apple in the Garden of Eden. We choose the apple, and the apple of the tree of life we can't get. So life, we can't give life, but we have knowledge, but we can't create life. This is what we create. We think we're gods, so we create monsters. We have knowledge, but when we deviate from the true path, we produce death. If someone's producing death, it's a bad sign. Look at it abstractly. Stop seeing it purely as logic and see it abstractly if you want to see it more like an artist, I would say. And seeing it more like an artist is God-given. It's God wants us to see it like an artist and see it like a scientist and see it like a workman. He wants us to see it like the person that builds shoes, but he also wants us to see it as the person that draws shoes. He wants the person that sees the shoe and says, "Why, that's a beautiful shoe." Just sniff for death and know what it is. Think of how an alien that hasn't even figured out our shapes and forms would see it. In fact, they might have an easier time spotting evil than we do. But if we can spot the evil, we're in more danger because we panic. The blind man accepted the monster because he couldn't see the ugliness. So he was in this kind of idiot safety. The monster was dangerous, but he was plainly dangerous. You're going to say, I know a lot of people are going to say, oh, he wasn't dangerous. He was on the cusp of new things. But no, he was dangerous because still the answer for him was to not blame his creator. Even though his creator was flawed, he has to realize that he is flawed. So because he's flawed, he has to get past his flaws. But he can't. Everybody could see his flaws. That's the whole thing is with Frankenstein. That's conceit, is that people can see his flaws. It's not the ugliness. The ugliness is real. It's not like he's ugly, but he's beautiful inside. He's created badly, and the blind man can't see this. Okay, if you want to think the blind man symbolizes anything, you might say, oh, Oh, the blind man symbolizes someone that doesn't judge you. And so he's not judging the monster. So you could say that too. But when the blind man's friends or family come and they see he's with the monster, now you could say that why they're foolish, because they panic. Okay, they don't have to panic. They didn't have to panic. They shouldn't have panicked. But what do you do? What do you do when there's a monster and you recognize the monster? You could see the ugliness, because the ugliness is moral ugliness. It's something more, because when you're looking at Mary Shelley, it's moral ugliness that she has, a moral ugliness that's created by her father. I know this is going to be, people will say, why you can't say that, moral ugliness, and we're supposed to be past that right now. We're supposed to say why we know that people aren't ugly and awful inside, and yeah, I know that, but I don't know that. Actually, I don't know that, because when I draw, I see that, like, this sounds like an egotistical statement, but part of the purpose of drawing is to see the beauty in everyone. Okay, so I'll see beauty in people, and there are people that are supposed to be beautiful. You could see the ugliness in them. Like, it's a lot like saying you could see the like inside you're ugly, but it's not, because that ugliness starts making you ugly. It makes you ugly, and in Hollywood they'll get plastic surgery to stop them from being ugly, not to stop them from being older. It's to stop them from being uglier, because if their souls get too wicked, they need to get plastic surgery, because you'll see the wickedness. It's the age. They don't care about the age. They're just trying to stop you from seeing their wickedness. If you deviate from the true path, you produce death. Hollywood actors have kind of become Frankensteinian. I mean, like the monsters, not like the scientists. And I mean, the monster doesn't have to look beautiful. It's like a reverse Frankenstein, where they try to stop the monster from showing up, and that they're anyway. I think I'm writing a different story right now. I'm starting to think that's an interesting concept. Anyway, when you think of like that, now that blind person in Mary's life, like, can we think of a real analog to that happening? It's when Mary would bump into someone that would have no idea about her reputation, that would happen. That would happen, and she would be, having a good time. Maybe she would say, hey, let's go meet up for tea. And I mean, meanwhile, the other girl's friends would pull her away from the wicked Mary Shelley. And that's, Mary Shelley wouldn't have had the same literal events that the monster had, but she had similar events that the monster had. That's the funny thing. Okay, like, this doesn't have to happen. You could write a story just from observing or just pure imagination. But Mary would have felt all this. She would have experienced all this. She wrote her beautiful novel, first published in her husband Percy Shelley's name. People use this as an example of the sexism of her age. But, I mean, there may have been sexism during that age, but I don't think this is actually a good example of the sexism of her age. Mary Shelley's mother was a published author. So she, like Mary Shelley, her name was Mud. She was scandalous. Her father could have even sent a freeze out to publishers as well. Everybody knew, like, it was a small world in those days. The elites were a small world. Everybody knew what you were doing. Everybody knew what Mary was up to. She was the scandalous daughter of William Godwin, and they were looking at her, and they saw scandals, so they're They're not going to let her get away with that. So Percy Shelley and Mary Shelley tricked the publishers. Percy Shelley's name made an initial hit. But since the novel was a clear masterpiece, nobody complained when they found out it wasn't written by Percy. It was published by in Mary's name after that, and gradually, being the author of Frankenstein, I would expect that redeemed her somewhat. Like that tends to, you tend to get libertine privileges when you do write a culture defining masterpiece. I don't want to say culture defining. It defines something in human existence. I don't know if you can go back to any time when that story's not relevant. Like, even if you go before technology, you're going to find relevance in that story. Maybe it didn't save her name in certain places. Maybe when she went to certain restaurants, people whispered around her. I don't know. These are the days when the Grimms were collecting their stories. As people, these are the old-fashioned days. I guess English villagers had Joseph Jacobs collecting theirs, but Mary's opium dream, she dreamed it up in Switzerland. A lot is made up of the concept coming from opium, but I think I've proven that the story comes from Mary's life, not opium. It's a metaphorical treatment reflecting her own life. Our hearts tend to be, metaphorical, you could say allegorical treatment reflecting her own life. Our hearts tend to be with Mary and her monster. But I don't know if people realize William Godwin was Dr. Victor Frankenstein. Mary might have been cooking the story up in her head days before she took opium. I've never taken opium or heroin or morphine, but one thing I know about it, in all drugs, is when a smart person does drugs, they might think things they might not have thought of if they weren't doing the drugs, but they'd also think things they might not have thought of if they flew in a blimp. Imagine the story Mary Shelley would have written if she wrote it flying in a blimp. If she flew in a blimp, the story would have been called Frankenstein. I've met a lot of junkies when I used to live in Vancouver. I assure you, none of them are writing poetic fiction. You can find my books in the links below. I write and draw comic books. They are very imaginative and interesting, and pretty well 80 pages or more each, except for my children's book, which is just really funny. And El Shaddai too. That's what you should buy first if you buy anything. And then my Trump book is really good, whether you hate him or love him. It's about him, but it's also about the media. It does a really clever thing. When you see it, it's kind of about reality itself, okay? And I have fairy tale books, and I'll catch you later.